Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. On today's episode, I deliver a PSA. Salem talks border wall. Canadian wolves come to Colorado. Big friendly giants or super monsters? And a whale that makes us wail.
All right. Hello, Mark. Good to see you.
Hello, Sam. How are you?
Oh, I am living the dream, the frozen dream, if you will. We are getting extremely low temperatures up here in Grand County this week. I think we're dropping down to negative 20 something this week. So, in honor of that, I did go skiing across the frozen lake and let the wind blow, not in my face, but in my face covering and onto my ski goggles, and forced my 7-year-old to go out with me. And by force, I mean he wanted to go and he forced me to go out with him. So I've been good. How are you doing?
I am also well. Just got back from Yellowstone and experienced the negative 25-degree morning the last day I was there. But a truly remarkable time. You can't have a bad time in Yellowstone in the winter. And so it was a shorter trip. It was just 4 days, but did get to see, I believe I saw tripod. So I'm waiting on confirmation whether or not that was in fact him. But a lot of coyote friends. I saw more moose there than I've ever seen on a trip before. And for me, I really like photographing moose in Yellowstone more than in Colorado, just because it never quite sits right with me with the moose here, knowing that there was no established breeding population in Colorado. So, but seeing them there, just an outstanding opportunity, and especially in the snow. And then, just the normal hum yum, the blah, two mountain lions I saw for the first time in my
Oh, the
life.
hum bum of two mountain lions. And for folks who don't know, who Tripod is, who didn't tune into our Mark Beckhoff podcast, Tripod is an allegedly he pretends like he is a three-legged coyote, but he's an imposter. He will put that fourth leg down when no one is looking. And so we're
That's right.
confirming he is alive. And then for folks who also don't know, moose were introduced to Colorado. So that's why Mark is not happy to see them here, or at least not as happy as he is to see them in Yellowstone. And now, Mark, to the most important part, two mountain lions.
Two mountain lions. Believe they were about a mile away. It was the photos I got were not worth anything, but I did make out their shapes, and they were up on a cliff up in mountain goat territory, and they we were suspecting that it was a mom with a young male who was larger than her.
Oh, interesting. For those who haven't read Mark Elbrock's book, Cougar Conundrum, I learned that mountain lions, not all of them eat the same thing, and that some mountain lions may just specialize in mountain goat, while others may just specialize in smaller prey, and others may just specialize in elk. And I think that's fascinating about those mountain lions. I wonder if they were mountain goat specialists.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. And it wouldn't surprise me because so this was deep in the Lamar Valley, and wolves do visit the Lamar Valley quite a bit. There was a pack closer to where they were in the valley, but that's also at the edge of the park, and that pack left the park never
Oh,
to return
no.
because people had killed them. So but it wouldn't be surprising that they found a good spot, a safe place with plenty of caves to stay in, and then having those mountain goats there might as well make it your primary source of food. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see. I've got some friends that frequent the park quite a bit, and see if they see her and the young one um, again, and if they're in the same location, if the goats are still around, and all that good stuff.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And speaking of coyotes and wolves and moose, but mainly coyotes, I think that you're going to start us off with a public service announcement today for our news stories all about coyotes.
Hi, I'm Mark Searles, and this is a public service announcement. Yeah, I could just
Go
think
ahead.
of
Go ahead. Let's hear it. I give me your
yeah,
best PSA.
right, yeah. This is your brain thinking about coyotes, and so we are thinking about coyotes because right now, January through March is coyote mating season across the continent, and so yeah, it for me as a wildlife photographer, it is an exciting time because they are out more in the daytime and frequently are traveling in pairs because coyotes will try to mate for life if given the opportunity if both mates make it and so seeing them together, they're showing signs of affection, they are yipping and howling and doing all those things is just really exciting. As anyone who loves seeing our wild neighbors out there, but it also comes with some extra precautions that we need to take, and especially where I am in Lakewood, Colorado. I visited my coyotes this morning that live down the street. And sure enough, there two of them, the mated pair, were out on the ice, hanging out and enjoying a cold, sunny morning. And even though that park is frequented by many dogs and people, they felt comfortable out there. But those are a kind of an exception to the normal rule. Like they figured it out. They know how to coexist with humans, and the humans that go there are understanding for the most part of that this is their home, and everyone pretty much respects them. So what will happen though is the coyotes that have not found a mate may be out on the move more. So they could be going through your neighborhood, looking for a mate, and when that happens, then your outdoor pets could fall victim. Looking for a quick meal, the coyote could see a cat and to a coyote, a cat is no different from any other small animal that is on the menu. So, during this time, it's really important to make sure that when you're walking your dog's on a leash. When you have a cat, you know, pretty much don't let your cat outside unattended. You can do what I did and build a catio so the cat can be outside and safe and keeping the birds safe as well. So, so typically, if you do have bold coyotes around, that they're becoming too close for comfort. First look at why are they coming, or do you have food sources around your house? So making sure garbage is tidy, and making sure that you don't have pet food bowls outside are great ways to keep not only coyotes but raccoons and other little critters that like to come and get a free snack. And then if you do have a coyote that comes, hazing is the best method. So there are a few different ways to haze. You can haze by visually hazing, making yourself really big, shaking your arms around, just making a big exaggerated scene. And then there's verbal hazing as well. Shouting at them. You can use noisemakers like rocks in a can, shaking that around. So there's a lot of different ways to do the hazing, and then there's also kind of passive hazing where you can use motion detector lights. So when the coyote comes in the yard or fox or whoever it may be, those are always great deterrents. We use them for mountain lions as well. They animals don't like sudden lights. They don't like sudden noises. Anything that's out of the ordinary spooks them typically and moves on, and they'll move on. But you can't keep using the same things over and over. So a variety of techniques to haze is really the best method. So I looked around, and it's really great to see that I saw this story about coyote mating season, not in one paper, but in paper and TV stations across the country, from North Carolina to Tennessee to Texas to Colorado. So, in for the most part, all of them except for one were very positive. One guy was like, "Well, remember, you can shoot a coyote any time of day, any day of the year in Texas."
Well,
So
you can also do that in Colorado.
yeah,
So
yes, you can do that in Colorado. So, but for the most part, it was like, hey, these are our neighbors, and this is a unique time of the year, and just take some precautions, and like the precautions that I mentioned. So it was really great, and you can always, I got to plug the organization I work for, Project Coyote. If you ever want more information on coyote mating season or pup rearing season or anything like that, you can always go on projectcoyote.org, and there's some really great resources on there. And some of them have my photos on there too. So another plug,
ooh, photos of you or photos of coyotes?
photos that I took of coyotes. Yeah, yeah, yes. I guess you could use a photo of me, hold it up as a hazing tool.
Big mural of your face to haze with.
It's been known to scare many an animal away.
Yeah, I always tell people there are three parts of coexistence. One is remove attractants, trash, outdoor pets, cats. You want to bring them in, especially at night. The catio is a great idea to implement passive hazing tools, which you talked about, spotlights, all of that sort of stuff that you don't have to pay attention to, but it works for you. And then three, that active hazing piece, making yourself really big, yelling. That's the kind of things you would do to escalate if you had an encounter with most wild carnivores, with the exception of grizzly bears. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mark. That was a great PSA voice.
Oh, thanks. There's a future for me in the 1990s, I guess. So, well, let's move on to your first story, and I believe this one also has linkages to coyotes, but maybe not quite the same coyotes I was talking about.
That is correct. There are actually two kinds of coyotes in this story, and some are people and some are the animals we just talked about. And we know that we have the presidential inauguration upon us and Trump's second term. And one of the big concerns around this term of the Trump presidency are the ecological impacts that the presidency may have on the United States. And a big one is the border wall. And I hadn't really thought of the border wall beyond just the atrocity that it is. You think border wall awful. Uh, but
Well, at least we're not paying for it.
you know, sure. Um, so, but what was really interesting was The Guardian had this great article all about looking at how animals move back and forth across the border and how important those passageways are to native wildlife, and how those are some of the most wild areas left in our country too. And so these really unique desert ecosystems that serve as the wildlands between the United States and Mexico, that all gets disrupted with a border wall. And I think one of the most concerning sections of the border wall, at least according to this article I read, was the Arizona section, where Arizona is poised to perhaps have a wall across their entire border. And as you know, and as most of us who appreciate big cats know, that's where the Mexican jaguars will come through. And so it's really concerning. It could have devastating impacts, but of course, none of us know right now exactly what that looks like or exactly what's in store during this presidency. Every presidential turnover, we see a new suite of wildlife management decisions. This one is no exception. So I think it's really important for us all to pay attention and to see what we can do to advocate for wildlife on that United States Mexico interface and also advocate for humans that may need to cross the border too.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a side note, if you ever want to learn more about the origins of the border wall, there's Malcolm Gladwell, who does Revisionist History podcast, has an episode where he talks about how it came to be, and it's really fascinating. And Malcolm, I mean, he's an amazing storyteller. So, but yes, it is devastating to think of the impacts and know the impacts that this wall, this unnecessary wall, creates. And I mean, it you don't have to have any specialized degree to know that animals move. And when you put a big object in the middle of their path, that's going to have some big, pretty big consequences. And then I would imagine too that there's the islands that it creates for species that do live on both sides of the border. I would imagine that's creating some issues as far as genetic diversity goes too.
Right, right. And we've seen that with highway systems, how that can impact wildlife without proper wildlife corridors built into highway systems. And this is no different. And at this time, nothing bigger than a jackrabbit can really get through how the wall is structured. And so that can be really devastating to genetic diversity, especially of rare, threatened, and endangered species. And while the jaguar is definitely a charismatic animal that we watch move back and forth, we know that those big species on top are often a beacon of what is happening down the food chain. So that can impact all sorts of different plants and animals having that wall in place. And we're not really giving a lot of thought to those impacts. So something for advocates to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, a few years ago, I don't know if it was an NGO that was offering the reward, but in Arizona, it was like a $500 reward if you could get photographic evidence of a jaguar in Arizona. Are you familiar with this?
No, but I did see a video of a jaguar, and I think that had just come out that a guy had captured on one of his trail cams, and it was a jaguar in Arizona because they thought, oh, maybe they're extirpated now because El Jefe was there forever. That's a big male jaguar that had made Arizona his home. And then more recently, there was video footage captured of another jaguar in the area, which was huge, and that was confirmed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. So we know they're still there.
Yeah.
We know they're still charismatic. We don't want the wall to impede their crossings. And from one charismatic species to another, I know I am here to tear us down today with stories of caution and tragedy, but you are here to build us up with another charismatic animal for your second news story, correct?
Yes. And and we can still keep caution in there
Okay,
for
good.
this one.
We probably should. We probably should. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. So this is concerning the Colorado wolves that are being reintroduced. The second year of reintroduction. So we did one reintroduction of 10 last year in 2000. Well, at the end of 2023. And then now is the second round. And this time they went to Colorado Parks and Wildlife went to British Columbia and captured 15 wolves. And it consisted of 7 males and 8 females. And they've all been given vaccinations. They've been fitted with collars and then transported in 3 different groups. And so they were released on 3 dates, the 12th, the 14th, and the 16th of January in Eagle and Pitkin counties. So for folks that are outside of Colorado, they don't really know what those counties are, but you'd probably be familiar with Eagle County. Has Vale is in the Eagle County, I believe. Yeah. And then Pitkin County is where Aspen is. So notable locations, and uh, along with them, so those were on the 12th, 14th, and 16th, and then on the 18th, the Copper Creek Pack. So there are five members of the original Copper Creek Pack that were uh, taken into custody by Colorado Parks and Wildlife in late August and early September of 2024. So this pack consists of Mom, who she had four pups, or she had five pups. Four were caught. The fifth pup, we have no idea where number five is, if five is still alive or not. We hope so. But so, and then Dad died from complications from a gunshot wound. So uh, the five Copper Creek members that were in custody are now also released back out there. And with this release of these British Columbia wolves, it's I'm hopeful with them because they have not had any experience with cows or sheep, and so hopefully they just get out there once everything kind of settles and they figure out what the hell just happened to them. They know what to go for, and don't even the idea of a cow doesn't even register in their minds. So really hopeful for this next wave. I think this one's going to be really important for us moving forward and really getting inching closer to a sustainable population.
So, for with the wolves, I think that custody is definitely the right word. They were doing time for murdering cows. They have since been returned to the general population, and I was really saddened, and I think we talked about this with Dr. Beckoff on our first episode, to see that family put into captivity when they did everything that wolves should do and that we hope wolves will do once they're in the wild. I think the one mistake they made again was cows, and wolves aren't sitting there doing the calculation, oh, that animal's domestic, that animal's wild. It's, oh, that animal's easy prey. I'm going to go for that. And most of our domesticated cows don't have the same sort of defense mechanisms in place that wild bison or even more wild herds of cattle would have. So it's a sad story, but I'm excited for the Canadian wolves. And are you prepared to answer all of the Canadian super wolf myths?
I yes, because I was thinking about them. And if we truly want to make this into like this Canadian super wolf thing, well then let's actually let's throw in some stereotypes. So one, these wolves are going to be the friendliest wolves we could possibly have.
Will they like donuts? They're going
They
to like
will
donuts, aren't
they
they?
will eat poutine primarily,
Okay.
elk on the side when they can't get their poutine.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and
They're big fans of ice
obviously,
hockey.
yeah, if
Mm-hmm.
you
Got it.
if here's a word to the wise for the folks that live in Eagle and Pitkin County. If you're watching the Colorado Avalanche and they are playing the Maple Leaves, make sure the volume is low, your windows are shut. You don't want to attract the wolves to your home. That's
Yeah,
my second PSA for the day.
good.
Okay, I'm on a
Minimize those
roll.
attractants.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, Canada, we kid, but I swear this will be the next thing that happens. I've seen this happen in Washington and in Montana and in Oregon, where once wolves came in from Canada, it was, oh, these aren't normal wolves. These aren't the wolves that we would usually see. These are Canadian super wolves. So I want to say I called it. And so when it happens and I share that as a news article in the next episode or the next couple episodes, I can say I told you so. I'm calling dibs on that right now.
It's all yours. Yeah,
Yes.
I love the Canadian Super Bowl, and especially in places like Washington. You know how close to the border you are, right? But yeah,
Well,
but these are entirely different because I mean, they had to cross over a border. Maybe we should think about getting a border wall for Canada so that these super wolves don't come down and wreak havoc on our good fine American cows.
that's that's exactly what I was thinking was, why have less border walls? We should be going for more. We should enhance the absurdity. Canada may be building one for us soon, for all
Yeah.
I know. Who knows? This is a crazy time we live in. Well, what else do folks need to know about wolves? And then I can bring us sufficiently down for our final news story of the day.
No, though that now it's just that waiting game. So I'm hopeful. I know you're hopeful, and I think we're really this is the next step to positive talk about wolves, and it may not happen this year, but I know the more wolves we get, the more established they get, we can finally people will hopefully wear down from their rhetoric and start appreciating that they're just part of Colorado again. So tell me some downer news.
Well, it's dinner news, but it's about animals that are appreciated, so that's good. I'm here to bring us the intermission of the story of the J-pod, the southern resident orcas, where we had Talakwa who had lost her calf and had been carrying the calf around. I've got 17 days and more than 1,000 miles where she carried her dead calf. One of the cool things that NOAA does, and that's the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, I'm going to get that all right on the first time, is they actually track the acoustics for whale calls. And so they've been tracking them while they've been in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Juan de Fuca. I'm going to have to probably do an edit later and let everyone know how to properly say that because we know I have totally ruined Talakwa in the last couple episodes, but I think I've got it right this time. And they've been able to see that the pod has moved out of the strait now and into the ocean where they're harder to track. But what Linda Mapes did in the Seattle Times article was really capture how whales grieve
Hmm.
and how a whole community really was grieving around these whales and with these whales. And that was everyone from the Lummi tribe to local residents of Swim to professors to a poet to a ton of children that showed up to honor this calf that had died and bear witness to her grief. And the best quote, and I'll try to do this without crying because I said I would, so I will do my best. Um, but so there is a recent paper about the accelerating extinction risk for the southern residents, and that paper was written by Rob Williams, and he's the chief scientist of the Ocean Initiative. And he says that if a Hollywood producer had asked him to consult on a script in which a whale whose family was shattered and food taken away carried her dead calf for everyone to see, not once but twice, he would reject it as unbelievable. And yet, here we are. At some point, you have to admit she's trying to tell you something.
Hmm.
And I think that that's something that's really stuck with me as a mom and stuck with me with how persistent she has been with each passing of each calf, and that we are in an extinction crisis right now. You and I are both reading Dan Flores's book about how North America really came to be through several mass extinctions, and we're certainly living in the middle of one with climate change and biodiversity loss. And to bear witness of the grief or to the grief of an animal like Talakwa and know that it's human impacts that cause that grief, and to think about how do we minimize those impacts across oceans and across continents is something that's really sticking with me. And it's something that I hope we can do more. But I do suggest everyone read the article in the Seattle Times. Linda Mapes just did a great job summarizing how people were feeling the grief of this orca.
Yeah, I mean, that's powerful. As, on a side, so you brought up Dan Flores's book. It's called Wild New World, and he will be a future guest on our podcast. So stay
Yes, he
tuned
will.
for that episode. And I have a question. I don't know if you know the answer is when she's carrying the calf, do you know how that works? Is she using her fins to kind of push, or is she pushing with her
She
nose?
pushes with her nose, she pushes the calf above water with her nose. And so that's adding stress again to her body to push that animal. And we know these animals they aren't eating enough as
Hmm.
is because they have a depletion of their natural prey caused by humans. So we know that every little bit of energy is precious. So for her to send that message, it costs her more of that precious energy. But the fact is, she's keeping her towards the surface because that's where she could breathe, or that's
Yeah.
where we could see her, and that's how she has been pushing her.
Yeah. Well, I hope that her efforts don't go in vain and that this isn't a flash in the pan, that it's something that needs to catch up to a broader audience. And it sounds like, the Seattle Times is, covering, which is amazing. And then I hope that people are just getting awakened to, like, oh my God, that there are the animals that share this world with us are very similar to us and very compassionate and caring, and that we are doing really bad things and we have been doing really bad things, and it's never too late to start changing those ways. So I'm with her, and whether she knows that her quest as gaining attention probably around the world at this point, I would think that we're there with her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for being the bearer of sad news today.
But not of
Um,
bear news. I wasn't the bearer of bear news today, so I I did that successfully.
good job. Well, today's guest is Gary Skiba. Gary worked for the Colorado Division of Wildlife for 23 years, and throughout his professional career, Gary focused on threatened and endangered species management and spearheaded the agency's effort on biodiversity conservation and ecosystem management. He now serves as the wildlife manager for the San Juan Citizens Alliance, and we are happy to have him on the podcast. All right, Gary, thank you so much for joining us on the Wildlife Wire. If you could give us a little info on your background and what you're doing today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Well, I was raised in near Pittsburgh, just north of Pittsburgh. I went to school at the University of New Hampshire for my bachelor's degree in wildlife management. And when it came to time to consider graduate school, I had three offers for graduate school, and it was working on javelina in Texas, mourning doves in Virginia, or bighorn sheep in Colorado. Now here's a kid that never had been west of Akron, Ohio, and it wasn't hard to choose. So
Right.
I ended up,
Javelina sounds pretty interesting, though.
it could have been, yeah. But I ended up in at CSU and did my master's work on bighorn sheep in Dinosaur National Monument. And that's also where I was lucky enough to learn whitewater rafting, and which has been a big part of my life, rafting and kayaking since then. So when I ended graduate school, I took a job at a private hunting area near Greeley. It's mainly a waterfowl hunting area. Fantastic place if you're a duck hunter. And after being there for a year, I really gained a lot of skills in farming techniques, which I'd never really been on a tractor before. And on this property, we had a tractor. I did a lot of work with it, doing plantings for wildlife, that kind of thing. That then got me into the Colorado Division of Wildlife, which is now Colorado Parks and Wildlife after the merger. But I worked for DOW, the Division of Wildlife. I was there for a year in Wellington, north of Fort Collins a little bit, and then moved to Durango for 5 years as a biologist, a field biologist here, and then moved to Denver for a while. I did a lot of different things, including was the lead on the 2004 wolf management plan that CPW put together, which was really just a plan of how to address wolves that could come into Colorado from the north, as the Yellowstone and Idaho reintroductions were starting to show success. And
so was that the first time that the Department of Wildlife had considered what it looks like to have wolves in Colorado?
I think the first formal time, other than there was at least one resolution before that on the part of the commission that stated that they would not support the restoration of wolves. So, and just to be clear, this 2004 plan did not discuss reintroduction at all. Right. There was no intent there. It was only if wolves are moving into the state, how do we deal with them? And so it was an interesting process, similar to what we went through with the current wolf management plan, in that we had a stakeholder group. It was a little more streamlined than that. It took us about 6 months to finish that process, whereas the current process took about 18 months. But anyway, that's where I did my wolf work. And then I retired from DOW just before the merger that created CPW in 2010. And I went to work for Great Old Broads for Wilderness for a while, and then did a lot of different things. I was a dog catcher for a while, which was great.
Ooh. It's good. You could use those biology skills to catch some dogs.
Yeah, it actually did help, I think.
Yeah. And Gary, I'm wondering too, for our listeners, with the wolf management plan, there's a whole process that goes into these types of planning and plans. And the first one you mentioned was shorter. The most recent iteration, a little bit longer. What are the steps in a plan, and what did you have to do to accomplish creating a wolf management plan in 2004?
Right. And I would say there isn't necessarily a consistent process. I think that in the case of controversial species like wolves, there almost always is a stakeholder process involved. And it just depends how intense it is. Again, that's what we did both times for wolves, but there have been other plans that have not had that extensive kind of public involvement. For example, the lion that's behind you. There have been plans made, and there's a public involvement process, but it's not a stakeholder process as such. So, but typically any plan like that, regardless of how it's formed and what sort of group is making recommendations to the agency, eventually it goes to the CPW Commission for their approval. And that's what all plans have done, including the 2004 plan.
Yeah. And how does the agency define stakeholders then when we're considering controversial species like wolves? Who would be a stakeholder in wolves, and who does the agency mostly rely upon as, for stakeholder input?
Well, they try to include all of the usual suspects, I guess I would say. In the case of any wildlife management plan, you're going to have hunters involved, as they're a major constituency of the agency. You'll have the ag industry in some form, depending on just what the issue is, what species involved. And of course, with wolves, we had livestock producers involved. And then you have what I would consider wildlife advocates is probably the best, but non-consumptive wildlife advocates. And there was a lot of criticism about the process for the 2023 plan, in that people felt that it was weighted towards the consumptive users, the hunters and the ag industry. I don't feel that way. I think largely because I was there. I think we had plenty of input from the pro wolf side, and I'm not an extreme wolf advocate. I mean, I am a wolf advocate, but I also, because of my experience with the state agency, tend to take a pretty practical view of how we manage wildlife. So I'm not opposed, for example, to the lethal take of wolves under certain extreme conditions. But I don't think there's any reason, for example, and we talked about this a lot, there's no reason to have a recreational hunting season on wolves, similar to what you went through, Sam, with with Proposition 127, in that there really is no biological reason to have a lion hunting season. I mean, there are social reasons, and we should admit, we being, I guess, all of society, or particularly the hunting community, should admit that that's why we do it, is because we like to do it, not because we have a need to do it in any other sense. So
Yeah, I think that would be nice if if the agency was more upfront about that too, is that we do it because there are a few of us who like to do it,
right.
not because we need to do it. And I think that that's where it's hard to walk that line between carnivore management and management of ungulates, where for me, and I'm sure for you too, I've hunted ungulates before. I am fully supportive of my hunting community, but for species that are so essential to our ecosystems that we don't need to hunt, and that such a slim minority of people are killing for their own personal benefit, it seems like we should be able to implement reforms on those species. And right away, that becomes an anti-hunting movement, even though I myself have hunted and you have hunted too.
Right. Right. And it is. I think that, to me, we just should have that honest, open discussion about it. And wherever it goes is where it goes. I mean, there are going to be people, and you can argue even honestly, with deer and elk hunting in Colorado, which a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, some people rely on for the meat for their families. The vast majority of hunters do not. If they didn't kill an elk, their family is not going to starve. They're going to be able to feed themselves, and it's really about the experience. It's about the recreational part of it for the most part. And I don't consider that bad. I just consider it something that we need to recognize and be honest about.
I agree. And I think it's one of those things too, where a hunter is much like a shopper at your grocery store. So if you can get an organic pasture raised steak, or you can get, a feedlot animal, why would you not choose that healthier, happier animal? And so while they may not have to rely on an elk, it certainly is a benefit to have that meat versus having chicken that grew up, in a box that they never saw natural light. So
Yeah.
I totally understand that aspect of it too. And then coupling in the recreational side of it, I think it just all around makes for a good experience for that person to know that they sourced an animal for food that was happy and healthy in a natural environment.
Right, right. And part of the other reason that people do go for those feedlot animals is because they're less expensive. And we know, based on the results of our recent election, that the cost of groceries is important to people. It's a big issue for them. So, I mean, I can buy eggs when they go on sale for, $1.50 a dozen, but I tend to pay quite a bit more than that for either my neighbor's eggs or for, pasture raised eggs. But that's a decision I make. But I do realize there's a real cost for people that a lot of them can't afford.
Yeah, absolutely. And so back to your start with the state agency. So you were working with bighorn sheep at CSU, correct?
Correct.
And then you joined the Department of Wildlife. And so what was that switch like when you had the opportunity to join in on the Wolf Project at the beginning? I imagine there was probably some excitement just on the biological standpoint, interesting animals to research and make a plan for.
Yeah. Well, just one thing first is it's Division of Wildlife, not Department. Just to,
correct. Yes.
So you have that. And I did not immediately start working on wolves when I joined the agency. I mean, as I said, my first job was as a property technician, which is, I always characterize it as farming for wildlife. And then I was what was called a habitat biologist here in Durango for 5 years. And that really is someone who gets involved in a lot of the permitting processes, like U.S. Forest Service plans, county land use, those kinds of things, providing the agency's view on a particular project or concerns about a project. So I did that for 5 years. When I moved to Denver, I did a lot of different things for a while in Denver, but ultimately, the position I was in was the one that was assigned the task of being the technical lead on the wolf management plan. And so that was 2004.
And that plan, did that account for wolves coming primarily from Wyoming?
Wyoming and Idaho potentially, but most likely Wyoming. There was never much thought that there'd be wolves coming north from the Mexican gray wolf population, but we did expect them to come from the north. And in fact, the very first wolf that we know of that was confirmed absolutely in Colorado was killed while we were in the middle of the plan on I-70. Was hit by a car.
Oh, wow.
It came from the Yellowstone area.
So for the crowd that says, I support wolves being in Colorado, but I think they should migrate here on their own and it shouldn't have been a reintroduction. My first flag is, well, I mean, most of the time those wolves are having to go through the killing fields of Wyoming. So is that really ever going to be a feasible repopulation of wolves in Colorado by having them come through Wyoming?
Likely not. That's why why I supported the ballot initiative, because we did have some groups. I mean, we had a group in the very northwest corner of the state. They're gone. What actually happened there is a little bit of speculation. I don't think anybody except the people that did it really know, but the rumor is they were lured across the state line into Wyoming because they were right there in that corner of the state and shot legally in Wyoming. And a similar thing happened to the pack that formed in North Park, on the north end of North Park. And, those two wolves individually, the male and the female, came separately from Wyoming down to Colorado, met up and had a litter, and they're all except for the male, the father of the pack and one of his sons, all the others are gone. And, some of them probably natural mortality, but the rumor again is that some of them got lured across into Wyoming and were shot there. So while there have been these movements of wolves from the north, the feeling among the biologists was that it was never going to be enough to form a population, or was unlikely to, that the only way to really do that is through reintroductions.
Right. And so speaking of the biologist and wolves, and yourself being a biologist, do you think that there is some excitement within Colorado Parks and Wildlife by the biologist to have this apex predator that was essentially missing from the landscape back in the ecosystem, and a new animal to study in these ecosystems? And to me, I am not a biologist, but I would absolutely geek out on the fact of, oh my God, this is a whole big change here, and I'm going to be here to study and witness it. Do you think that there are those individuals in the agency that are excited about the reintroduction?
Yes, there's no question there are some. I would not say they're the majority. I would say they're a minority, and perhaps a small minority. And, the people that are in charge of the program, to the best I can figure, and, they have to be very careful about what they say and what they don't say. My take on it is that they are, well, there's two parts to it, I guess. One part is that they are excited about the idea of reestablishing a species that was extirpated. That's just a cool thing for biologists to do, like that ferret that's behind you there.
Right.
Really cool. And so there's that excitement that goes with it. The other part of it is, because it was done through the ballot initiative, the agency was given a mandate or given direction, and the agency is a professional agency and they do their job. And so some of them, I think, may not necessarily be supportive of restoration of wolves, but they recognize it as part of their job. And so they're going to do it as best they can. And then there are a lot of folks who in the agency are opposed to the wolf restoration. They're unhappy it happened. We have the Colorado Wildlife Protective Association, which is kind of a sort of a union. I guess I'd call it an association. It's not a formal union, but that's mainly wildlife officers. So the game wardens, as most people like to call them, district wildlife managers, what they're called in Colorado. And those folks that is the base of that organization. And they're the ones that came out in opposition. But that there are about 120 district wildlife managers in the state. So that organization kind of represents them.
Yeah, it's a small minority of employees. They got us with cats too, where And then in a very clever way, the hunting groups will say, well, employees at Colorado Parks and Wildlife don't want this. And
Right.
they'll issue press releases and amplify that sort of information, which is, incredibly frustrating. I think that the public doesn't understand necessarily that there's a values gap between folks that are within the agency managing wildlife and the values of the general public. And I think that, overall, the minority of hunting groups or ranching groups, who are considered stakeholders for the agency, they have a disproportionate voice. And most of the public does not know that, but the agency serves as an echo chamber for that voice too. And so it becomes really hard for the layperson to understand, one, why the agency is recommending things it's recommending, and also to trust themselves on making choices like with the wolf ballot or with the mountain lion ballot initiative, because it becomes very confusing. And again, we're not having those frank conversations about this is a values-based decision. We can back this with science either way.
Yeah, honestly, the science is never going to carry the day.
Yeah.
The facts don't. It all comes down to values, opinion, and emotional reactions. And that's what it comes down to. And we just need to recognize that too, from a management perspective is, and as you were talking about that, I was reminded of a quote from P.T. Barnum, which is nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American people. And it's true. I mean, and you can look at it. I mean, it's not so much intelligence as it is knowledge and what they base their decisions on. They don't base it on facts. Most people, I mean, won't. I mean, I am never going to be able to change the opinion of the extreme wolf haters. They hate wolves for a number of different reasons. And, I can give them all the facts in the world when they tell me that, the elk populations in the lowland area in Idaho have been devastated. It's true that they have, but not by wolves. It's because of habitat change. But you can't, the complexities, especially of wildlife management, are really lost on most people. It's very easy to take a very simplistic approach to it. Wolves kill elk. That's an elk I can't kill, period. That's what it's based on. So it's a difficult one, and it's difficult for the agency to get good information out and have it used. And and the commission, it's difficult for them to gather all the information that they really should have when they're making decisions. So it's just a tough situation, I think, as far as expecting people that expect that science is going to be the driving force between or the driving force for decisions are going to continue to be disappointed.
Yeah, but and at the same time, it's very interesting when you see opposition to ballot initiatives specifically, and their tagline is "You trust the science, let the biologists make the decisions," which I always found kind of funny because the biologists aren't making any decisions.
Correct.
So, as one that was a biologist with the state agency, how often did you see science go from the biologist and follow through to actually make policy change, or does it just often get morphed along the way into something and there's a bit of science left, or what are your takes on that?
Well, there's always science left. I mean, I would call the decisions that are made by the commission or by the agency, if they're separate from the commission, as science-based, but they're based on economics and social concerns as well. And a classic example is the way that we manage, let's just say, an elk population. People have this idea that we have some idea of what the carrying capacity is, what the physical carrying capacity is for an elk population in a certain area. We don't. What we have is we have a number of elk, and then when we go into the process, we can say, all right, to the best of our knowledge, this area probably could support this many elk, but we have concerns among hunters. Hunters want more elk, and we have livestock, or we have ag people who may be impacted negatively by elk who would like fewer elk. So you have this public process that goes on that ends up creating the objectives for those herds, which are science-based in the sense that they're not going to go outside the bounds of what you would have, either so low that the population is going to disappear or so high that they're starting to cause problems, or that they're impacting their habitat negatively, which could happen. But it's somewhere in between. But it's because of these social and economic concerns that number gets developed. So we just need to recognize that's what it is. It's not, to me, it's not bad. It's just the reality. I mean, it makes sense that that's the way we manage wildlife to me.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think it's bad either. I think the hard part again is the transparency around that decision making. Rather than saying we're making science-based decisions, great, you are, but you're also making decisions based on stakeholder values.
Sure.
And I think that that's something that should be upfront in decision-making processes in state agencies. And I think the reason that it isn't is because that would change the status quo, right?
I don't know. I guess I'd push back on that a little bit. I think if you asked any of the sitting commissioners right now how they make decisions, they would say, yeah, we have the recommendation coming from the agency, on the science part of it, and often on the social economic part of it from the agency. And then we consider all these things that we're supposed to consider. And yeah, to the extent they can do that effectively. But I don't think any of them would argue that they're making decisions solely on science. There may be some in certain cases where, if someone were to ask, well, how many leopard frogs should we let people kill, or take into captivity?
Unlimited bag limits,
Well, there is. Right. And so, you could come up with a science-based recommendation there and say, yeah, if we allow more than this, we're going to have problems with our leopard frogs. But, you'll still get the social part in there. But I think that one could be more science-based than what we do for the species that we do manage intensively, the big game animals in particular.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on the commission piece. I guess what I'm referring to more is the agency piece. That recommendation from the agency before it's ever made to the commission goes through the same values-based process. And I think that that's something that most of the public doesn't know. That's not just an abstract, solely scientific process, that it also goes through a values-based process. And there's not a lot of transparency about that process before it comes to the commission as a recommendation for the public.
Yeah, I would agree that the public doesn't understand that. I think the agency and the commission understands it quite well. They do. I mean, the Front Range Lion Plan, for example, there was public input along the way. It wasn't just based on biology. It was based on societal values. So the agency definitely considers all that. We have folks doing social science research within the agency. So they are doing it, and they explicitly recognize. So, but I do agree with you, though, that there's a public perception, most likely, that it's based on science, and it's not only based on science. It is based on science.
Right.
It's also based on the public values.
Right, just not exclusively. And it would be nice if the public understood those different pieces in play, the pieces of the pie that come together when making a recommendation to the commission.
Right. And back to P.T. Barnum, a lot of people that don't really even know that the Division of Wildlife is different than the Forest Service or BLM or anything else. They don't.
That's
the public is not in tune with that. And that's recognitions we all should have, is that, again, if we have this expectation that science and facts are going to drive people's decisions in the public, good luck.
Yeah. Speaking of science and facts, I think Mark and I wanted to talk a bit about the, commission appointments and how one becomes a commissioner, and how a lot of science and facts were manipulated in your process going forward. So, Mark, I think you had a specific question on that. Did you want to cue that up?
So, Gary, you worked for the agency for 24 years.
Correct.
You are a biologist. You are a hunter. You are an angler. You are the poster child of everything that should be valued as Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commissioner. You served as a commissioner for 8 months. Is that correct?
Correct.
You were appointed by Governor Polis to that position, and then we hit a bit of a political crazy town, and going through your Senate confirmation hearings. So, walk me through, one, what is it like to be a state wildlife agency commissioner? It's a volunteer position. It seems like a job that would be both rewarding and incredibly time consuming. But take us through that for those that have never been.
Yeah, it is both. Well, let me put it this way. To do the job well, it is time consuming. And I had the great advantage of having worked for the agency, so I understood a lot of the mechanics and as a biologist, understood a lot of the biology behind it, as well as the social and economic pieces of it, because it was the world I lived in. So I was very fortunate, I think, to have that background and be able to work as a commissioner for the time that I did. But every commission meeting, the commissioners get 300 or 400 pages of materials before the meeting. And there are 8 or 9 meetings, depends. Sometimes, they're not every month, but typically 9, maybe even 10 months a year. And during the wolf management planning process, they met a whole lot more often than that too. So it was extremely demanding, that part of it, but it's always demanding to do the job well. Now you can, not do the job well. You can just go to the meetings with whatever you have in mind and, kind of peruse the agenda that morning of the first day of the meeting and kind of work your way through it in that way. But to do it well and to understand what's being presented to you does take quite a bit of effort, even for me, who understood a lot of the background. For someone who doesn't have that background with the agency or as a biologist, it's got to be a whole lot more difficult to do it well. And overall, I would say the commissioners do a good job, but it is a tough job. As you say, it's a volunteer position, and it takes considerable amount of dedication to do it well.
Yeah, and how far in advance do you receive those hundreds of pages of materials prior to
And can you get
meetings?
it on Audible?
Yes.
I don't think there's an Audible option, but I know of it if there was. It depends. Most of it comes in at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. So
that's nice. It's not terrible. I've seen other commissions where it's 2 to 3 days ahead of time.
And a lot of the for example, if you're anything related to rulemaking, a decision on regulatory items by the commission, those have to be put out to the public 30 days ahead of time, or I think it's 20 days ahead of time. So you have that for the rulemaking notice itself. So anything associated with that is going to be available. And typically everything's available at least, like I say, 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. But it takes an effort with that too. I mean, most of the commissioners have a job.
Yeah, and then you still have to do all of your research on the side of your full-time job. And often that becomes an equity barrier to serving on the commission, right? That if you've got a job and a family.
Right. Yeah. There's no question that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're a commissioner for 8 months. And then what happens after you're appointed by the governor? You serve on the commission, you're reading your hundreds of pages of research, you're doing your job. There's no Audible available to you to just listen to your commission packets. Then you have to go through this whole process to stay a commissioner. And that's the Senate confirmation process. And can you tell us a bit about that? Because that seems, speaking of P.T. Barnum, that seems like a total circus.
It's interesting because when I was appointed by the governor, the seats on the commission are assigned to different categories. So there are 3, they call them sports persons seats, which I find that word bothers me. It always has. I call them hunters and anglers. So these hunting and angling seats that I was appointed to, and I do hunt, I do fish, but the folks in the more extreme parts of the hunting community didn't feel like I was active enough in the hunting community. And that's really what it came down to, that and my support for wolf restoration. There are a lot of hunters who feel that wolves are a wrong decision and they are opposed to it. And for those reasons were opposed to me. So, there was a Senate committee hearing, the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee. And, through that process, it became pretty clear, while they did not recommend me to the full Senate, and in consultation with the governor's office, it became clear that they weren't going to be able to get the votes together in the Senate, the full Senate, to confirm me. So that was the decision that was made then, and that's why I withdrew.
Yeah. And so when you say that you don't hunt and fish enough, how does that come in?
Do you have a punch card every time you go out that you have to present?
No, I'm wondering, so does that mean that outside hunting groups, our Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, our Colorado Predator Hunters and Fur Trappers, those guys, they all go to the Senate and say, hey, he doesn't represent us, you shouldn't confirm him, and then that influences the outcome of the decision?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it wasn't that I don't hunt enough. That may have been part of the reason, but it was also that I wasn't active enough in hunting organizations. that was part of the concern. So it was a kind of both sides of that. And again, support for wolf restoration.
Back to that sort of equitable representation piece, you had mentioned, 3 seats go to sports persons, those are hunters or anglers, and then 3 seats go to ag, right? They go to ranching representatives or representatives.
Not any kind of agriculture. So
Yeah,
Ed Vardy is not a rancher, but he is an ag
he is an ag.
seat, and not ag representative, but in an ag seat.
And an ag seat, yes. So the seats are allocated in such a way that the commission, who makes all of this decisions about the state's wildlife, and it's a commission of 11, right away 6 of those 11 seats go to special interests or specific use groups that are more consumptive based interests that are more likely to vote together.
Yeah, I think so. Although you just have to look at the appointments that Governor Polis has made, and it's pretty clear that that is no longer the case because of what he's done. And again, using Edwin Vardy as an example, he is not your traditional rancher or ag person. I mean, he's in a kind of a pretty unique progressive sort of part of the ag industry.
Yeah.
And then you have, and you can select even in the more traditional folks. I mean, if you look at Dallas May, Dallas is an incredibly thoughtful and progressive rancher. And I push back against this idea that the commission is, really has all these special interests because, well, it's somewhat true. It's not as bad as people like to point at it, or the critics point to. It is not that bad, especially, I mean, here in Colorado, because of the appointments that the governor has made. I mean, he's if you told people 10 years ago there would be two African Americans on the commission, they would have told you were nuts.
Right.
Yeah, I think that Polis has done a good job at diversifying the commission for sure. I think the hard part is, the way the statute exists, it's still influenced by the whims of different governors, right? So if we have a less wildlife friendly governor or a more conservative governor, then that can certainly be maximized in the other direction than it is now. I would also say now, even with progressive appointments, it's still incredibly difficult to move progressive policy forward, right? And I think that's has to do with the institution, where it's tough to move that policy forward because of how the institution works.
Yeah, and I think that's basically true. And I think, and part of what I'm thinking about right now is the fact that we have a wolf management plan that is what it is, which is, very supportive of wolves. Now, that plan was, in a sense, forced on the agency through the ballot initiative, so they had to do a plan, and they had to have some plan to restore wolves, not just to throw a few wolves out and hope for the best. So they did that, but it is a pretty progressive plan. A lot of people are unhappy with components of it, don't think it's progressive enough. But at the same time, it is a progressive plan, in my opinion, and so that things are changing. And that's what I think about, and I think about it, through my career. I mean, I first came to Colorado in 1978, and God, that's a long time ago. It's 45 years now, something like that. And things have changed tremendously, from then till now. Just thinking about things like what we do for non-game wildlife, what we do for species that are imperiled, are threatened and endangered wildlife. And so I just see a lot of progress over that period of time. And I think that those who are concerned about the policy making of the commission really need to recognize the progress we've made. That doesn't mean, that they shouldn't criticize and point out where things can be improved. But I think you also need to recognize, and I'm not saying you, but one needs to recognize the progress that's been made.
What's interesting?
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say what's interesting there is I also believe there's been a lot of progress in wildlife management and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but yet when you were going through the Senate confirmation process, Senator Perry Will was quoted as saying that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is the hook and bullet club. So he clearly has a different viewpoint of that progress, or maybe he is refusing to acknowledge that this agency has made progress and not focusing primarily on hunting and angling, but recognizing that there are recreationalists, there are bird watchers, there are a number of users out there. So what would you say to someone like Senator Perry Will, former Senator Perry Will, that is putting out that narrative that no, our state wildlife agency is about hunting and fishing first. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say he's wrong. And I will tell you, first of all, that I consider Perry a friend, not a close friend, but he's a friend. Yeah. And I worked with him in the agency and didn't work closely with him there, but close enough that, we have a mutual respect. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
And so I think he's wrong about calling it a hook and bullet club, because it's not anymore. And that's part of my messaging about what the governor has done. I mean, that is the proof that we're not just a hook and bullet club. And you can look at how much we spend on threatening and endangered species and developing the state wildlife action plan, which brings funding to the agency. But by the time you go through that planning process and hire a coordinator for that whole thing, you're not making a lot of money off of the swap funds. You're just not. And so we do have a commitment to it that is outside of just saying, oh, well, that's only because you're getting money for it. So
right.
I think like I say, there's been a tremendous amount of progress. There still is that attitude, both outside and inside the agency, that we're mainly a hunting and fishing organization, but it's just not true. I mean, it's broader than, it may not be, well, it isn't to the point that a lot of people would like it to be, but it is much broader than just a hunting and fishing organization. And especially with parks. I mean, when you added parks in, you have a whole different aspect to it. We didn't have that particular interest of recreation in that sense. We had hunting and fishing recreation, but we didn't have recreation at parks and ATVs and those sorts of things that now are part of the agency's mandate.
And so if you got to play king or god or whatever the figure is, to be able to create your own state wildlife agency,
mm-hmm.
what would be your primary objectives, and how would you structure the hierarchy of needs for that agency?
Well, there are components to that. And I haven't said this yet, but I say it all the time, is it's complicated. Most things are. And in the case of a state wildlife agency, which does have the responsibility to manage wildlife species, some of which, if we didn't manage, we would have problem. When I say manage, we have hunting seasons for them, which is, whether you like it or not, is the primary way that we manage big game populations in particular. So with that, recognizing that part of it and recognizing the funding part of that, which is both license fees and also excise taxes through Pittman Robertson and other sources, that is going to continue to be a strong part of any state wildlife agency. It just is. So starting there, recognizing that piece of it and recognizing that is, in a lot of ways, a self-funded entity, that part of it, it makes sense to continue that strong focus. My approach would be to have the other parts of the agency or the other species have at least, I guess I'd call it equal standing, and recognizing again that funding's a part of it. So we're not going to be able to spend as much money as we would like on those species yet effectively, unless we get the consensus from the hunting community. Because if we started to take any substantial part of the fees or the revenues generated from hunting and fishing license fees and use those to restore black-footed ferrets or anything else that we might want to do, we would run into a buzzsaw. And I think appropriately so at some level. And I always struggle with this because you have hunters who say we're conservationists first, and they are conservationists and have done a tremendous amount of good through the way wildlife has been managed through the use of license fees. But a lot of them are not interested in the broader idea of conservation, or at least rail against it, like wolves, for example, or black-footed ferrets. There are a lot in the hunting community who would never support the idea of restoring black-footed ferrets, just because if it were to take any kind of resources away from the management of big game populations. So that's complicated. And like I say, both of those pieces would still be there. It's just a matter of how you balance them. And I would have a stronger or more focus on the non-game and T&E species.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Gary. Thank you. Sam, do you have any final questions?
I, of course, want to hear Gary's favorite place he's rafted, his favorite rafting experience here in Colorado, because I did the North Fork of the Poudre, and that was my favorite so far. But it was a little dicey for a little bit there.
There's a nice whistle in there, as I recall, about a
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And there's a couple of spots that just will suck you up and shove you under a rock, which are great. But I spent a lot of time rafting on a ducky, a 2-person raft, in a lot of areas you shouldn't have rafted on a 2-person raft. And some of my closest friends here were rafting guides on the Grand Canyon River, and they now work for the Park Service here. And so we get lots of good water days in the summer.
Yeah. No, well, as far as my favorite place in Colorado, that's a tough one. I might say Gore Canyon. I mean, it's just pretty extreme. And
did you do it? You've done it?
In a kayak, yeah.
That's nice. You can only run it like a week out of the year, isn't it? Like a couple weeks?
Well, yeah, it depends how good you are. There are people that can run at any time, and there are people that can't. And I never had great experiences in Gore. It was always a little bit difficult for me, but it's still one of the favorites. Just it's a unique place in a lot of ways. So I think that I like that one. As far as less intense pieces of whitewater, the Arkansas is just wonderful. It's a wonderful river, and all the way from Granite all the way down through the Royal Gorge. There's just so many different opportunities there. And that's, I've done more kayaking through Colorado rivers than I have rafting. But as far as rafting, my favorite is not Colorado. It is the Grand Canyon, which I just did this spring again.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's on my bucket list to get it done. So hopefully I'll get there.
All right. Well, Gary Skiba, it has been insightful and a pleasure to have you on the Wildlife Wire today. We both appreciate your insider viewpoints on what it's like to be a employee in a state agency as well as a commissioner.
Well, thank you, Mark and Samantha. I appreciate the opportunity. You guys take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.